Star Trek's Prime Directive is outdated. It represents a theoretical framework long dismissed by social scientists. Perhaps it even upholds a racist worldview, despite good intention. Yeah, I said racist. Let me explain. Starfleet Command's General Order Number 1, the principle of non-interference, the Prime Directive, is the most important rule in Star Trek.
Star Captain's most solemn oath is that he will give his life, even his entire crew, rather than violate the Prime Directive.
The Prime Directive assumes that societies go through a series of universal, natural stages of cultural evolution, and that interfering in those stages might be detrimental to any given society. It is debunked or outdated science, frankly, and we're going to explore why. But first, let's define this General Order Number 1 within the Star Trek franchise.
What happened? Our metascanners reveal this planet as perfectly harmless. The villagers, the Combs here, were friendly enough once they got over the shock of my white skin. As you've seen, we resemble the Yangs, the savages. Hold. Beverly, the Prime Directive is not just a set of rules. It is a philosophy, and a very correct one. History has proved again and again that whenever mankind interferes with a less developed civilization, no matter how well-intentioned that interference may be, the results are invariably disastrous.
That's it. The main theme of the Prime Directive. Captain Picard does say mankind, but I'm sure he means to include the ladies, esteemed individuals of non-binary categories, and all of the species of the Federation. Anyway, Starfleet is worried that contact could damage a primitive civilization, that an alien civilization is only ready for contact after reaching a specific advanced stage of technological and cultural achievement.
You see, my people once lived in caves, and we then learned to build huts, and in time to build ships like this one.
Some Starfleeters adhere so strongly to this philosophy that they would watch a whole primitive society die off rather than interfere.
You have no idea what the consequences might be once you involve yourself.
The consequences would have to be better than mass destruction.
You're not to warn these people. That's an order.
But it isn't always pre-warp societies that are being protected. There are a variety of applications of the Prime Directive. It could apply more generally to other warp-enabled political states, such as the Klingon Empire. The Federation used the Prime Directive as justification for not interfering in the brief Klingon Civil War of 2367. That line was maintained until it was discovered that the Romulan Star Empire was secretly meddling in Klingon affairs, posing a direct risk to the Federation, at which point Starfleet very much interfered. So there are shades of gray to how the rule is applied. It is established in Alpha Canon that the Prime Directive has 47 suborders, which can leave a lot of room for interpretation.
And I say to any creature who may be listening, there can be no justice so long as laws are absolute. Even life itself is an exercise in exceptions.
Even then, it would be generous to say that there was unanimous consensus on the matter.
We have to discuss the options. Please talk freely.
There are no options. The Prime Directive is not a matter of degrees. It is an absolute.
Watching the application of the Prime Directive within Star Trek has not cleared up the exact nature of its legal dimensions either, or if there even is a legal dimension. I mean, given the wildly diverse, unknown nature of the universe, how can there be one single law with legal ramifications to fit every first contact situation? Legal or not, given that there are 47 suborders, interpreting for the greater good and the least amount of damage can't be the same in every single alien context. But we just don't know. The franchise has never cleared this up. However, what we do know about the Prime Directive is that it's about giving other societies the space and autonomy to make their own decisions. Perhaps this part of the famous rule is about reducing harm as a sort of anti-colonialist stance. When the rule was created for the original series in the 1960s, The Vietnam War was raging, and a U.S. public increasingly felt interference in Vietnamese affairs was a detriment. The U.S. public, relearning again about the machinations of its own empire, was shamed by its destructiveness. Perhaps Star Trek sought to correct some of that with the concept of the Prime Directive. But in practice, the Prime Directive is all about drawing a line in the sand, saying that societies that had not developed to a sufficiently advanced degree were not capable of handling the knowledge of interstellar civilizations and should be allowed to continue their natural evolution without interference. Starfleet's stance is usually determined by the presence of warp technology or subspace communication technology within an alien society. Generally speaking, if they have warp drive, then they can handle the truth. If they don't, then they can't. If an alien society can travel out and theoretically make first contact with aliens themselves, then they are ready for Starfleet to first contact them. The truth is out there, apparently. But underlying all of this is an assumption that there are indeed universal natural stages of cultural evolution, and that interfering in that progression could be detrimental to a more primitive society that's not as far along on the path. But as we shall see, that assumption sits on some very shaky, some very antiquated grounds. Way back in the 16th and 17th centuries, here in the real world, ideas about the stages of progress began to percolate into more formal writings and theories. This intellectual strain was a response to Europe's shock of discovering a bunch of new-to-them, non-European societies in the world. That strain became a basis for the American and French revolutions and the European Enlightenment. Adam Smith, Adam Ferguson, and John Miller, among others, began to suggest a process through which societies evolve or advance, a cultural evolutionary process. A one Sir Edward Burnett Tyler, founder of the field of cultural anthropology, in 1881 hit upon the idea that societies progress through a single sequence of evolutionary stages, from primitive to advanced, a universal path with recognizable starting and ending points. It was this path, Tyler reckoned, that some societies had fully traversed and that others were still traversing. An entire cast of academic characters from this time period, from the mid-19th century through the early 20th century, described different versions of this idea and influenced each other. Lewis Henry Morgan, Herbert Spencer, Karl Marx, Max Weber, Emil Durkheim, John Wesley Powell, on and on. Why were European and European-derived societies so different from the rest of the world, they asked. The conclusion from all these dead white guys was that it must be because European societies represented the pinnacle of human cultural achievement, and that the rest of the world fell somewhere lower on the universal sequence of societal progress, behind Europe. Lewis Henry Morgan, in his 1877 work, Ancient Society, established 3 stages through which societies must progress: savagery, barbarism, and civilization. And Europe represented the civilization stage, conveniently. This unilineal evolution, as it is now called, the belief that European societies were the pinnacle of a universal sequence of human societal advancement, would go on to bolster arguments made by ethnocentrists and white supremacists and racists looking to science to back up their claims about the superiority of European culture. This continued throughout the 20th and now 21st centuries. However, as you might guess, it's no longer representative of anthropological thinking. The ethnocentric attitudes, the impulse to judge another culture absolutely by your own cultural standards, has made unilineal theory less and less palatable. And that's because the scale of human cultural diversity was not explained by the idea of a unilineal universal path. Why didn't more societies look and feel the same upon scrutiny, if there were only a few ubiquitous steps for societies to traverse? By the mid-20th century, the accumulation of anthropological fieldwork, deep comparative studies of various societies, and a soul-searching look at Europe's cultural sphere began to reduce the explanatory power of unilineal evolution. It didn't end up being a good theory after all, so if unilineal evolutionary theory doesn't describe the varieties of human experience, then what does? The field of anthropology and other social sciences began to move on from unilineal evolutionary theories of culture to multilineal evolution, which is a series of competing theories that posit, generally, that it wasn't a predetermined rubric of progress that drove society along a universal series of stages. It was, simply, adaptation that accounted for the staggering variety of cultural diversity in the world. The thinking was that each society, each culture, adapts to its own particular circumstances, environmental, biological, social, etc., in its own unique way, that there is not a universal path and a universal endpoint that societies traveled down or evolved towards. This thinking started to coalesce under the work of Leslie White, but its basic premises were strongly laid down by Julian Stewart, both anthropologists of the 20th century. Multilineal evolutionary theories have their limitations, and each individual theory is a little different from the next one. But largely the idea that cultures evolve along unique, unplanned paths has been taken up broadly by the field of anthropology because it confers enormous explanatory power, accounting more believably for the cultural diversity we see in the world. In this view, there is no universal cultural template that allows us to diagnose what stage a society is in or where they are headed. And while there are biological needs of individuals, and physical realities that societies must deal with, a society's solutions to those dilemmas is often its own. One culture's solutions don't necessarily resemble another's. Western Europe wasn't unique because it was the sole pinnacle of human cultural evolution. It was unique because its adaptations to its localized circumstances were its own. That isn't to say that there aren't some common generalities among all societies. Human societies have gotten more complex over the existence of the Homo sapiens species, for example. Anthropologists continue to squabble over the details. I can hear you guys typing right now. But that does not mean that there are universal endpoints or goalposts or developmental markers to the process of cultural evolution. Each society goes its own way, depending on what confers survivability and usefulness to its citizens. Just like biological evolution through natural selection, there is no predestined end result to human cultural evolution. There is no pinnacle to reach. It is a process with endless possibilities, endless permutations, and no master plan. One society's solutions to a dilemma might not work in another society's context. There's a really lovely example plucked from a moment of tragedy and hubris that helps to illustrate what we mean when we say that each culture evolves particular strategies according to its own contexts. A European exploratory effort called the Burke and Wills Expedition in the Australian outback of 1860 failed, and a handful of survivors straggled through the outback looking for food, water, and rescue. Through spasms of miscommunication with and assistance from the local Yandrawanda people, the European survivors learned of a bush spread made from the nardu seed. It temporarily solved the explorers' need for food when the local people prepared the bread for them, even after the survivors subsequently drove off the Aboriginal people. Copying the idea from the local people, the European survivors would go on attempting to make and eat this bread for weeks. But what they didn't know was that nardu is mildly toxic. Local cultures had innovated a multi-step preparation technique that detoxified nardu so it could be eaten safely. Most of the remaining European explorers, who didn't take the time to understand the how and the why of those steps, ended up slowly poisoning themselves to death, despite stuffing themselves with nardu bread. In this scenario, trying to figure out who is primitive and who is advanced isn't really asking the right question. What you should be asking is, who is best adapted to the local context? In this case, the European explorers, representatives of the pinnacle of human cultural evolution, if you ask Lewis Henry Morgan or Edward Burnett Tyler, did not have and did not know how to acquire the necessary cultural adaptation to survive in the outback, a place that has been peopled for 65,000 years.
Your feeling aside, I consider it highly unlikely that we will be selected for the new program.
Another example involves the infamous wheel, long a pop culture reference of a society's supposed stage of unilineal advancement. It gets used by lay people here in the real world in much the same way that Star Trek uses warp drive, as an arbitrary line of judgment.
Or maybe it didn't erupt because Mr. Spock detonated a cold fusion device inside it right after a civilization that's barely invented the wheel happened to see a starship rising out of their ocean. That is pretty much how you describe it, is it not?
Admiral, I have the report.
But here on nonfiction Earth, the wheel isn't a measure of anything. Let me share some examples from the pre-Columbian Americas, which were filled with societies and civilizations that contemporaneous Europeans considered alien. Founded in 1325, the city of Tenochtitlan, capital of the Triple Alliance, in Tlahtoloyan, what we now call the Aztec Empire, may have contained up to 200,000 people by the 1520s, making it one of the largest cities on Earth at the time, larger than most of the cities in Europe. Tenochtitlan had stone canals for boat traffic, huge marketplaces, massive public buildings, a sophisticated calendar system filled with many holidays. The city also had zoos, bathhouses, gardens, schools, a military academy, but all constructed without apparent widespread use of the wheel. In fact, the people of pre-Columbian Mexico did have wheels, they just didn't use them like Europeans did. Why, if you don't need to? If you traveled back in time and handed the people of this imperial state a modern wheel, would they figure out what to do with it? Would they want to? I'd wager that it's more complicated than that a technology is much more about a society's context than the usefulness of a particular tool. After all, we don't use the supersonic Concorde passenger jet anymore, which used to fly between New York and London in a mere 3 hours. We travel slower these days. Why? I mean, the Concorde was faster, wasn't it? Well, it's complicated. Our context around air safety has changed.
In this picture, you can see a long stream of smoke and fire as the pilot struggled to gain altitude. He failed.
The impact of the crash blackened the grounds of the small hotel on the edge of Paris. The dead lay in the fields. The plane was destroyed. The wheels could be seen a short distance from the hotel.
Throughout the existence of humanity, technological advancements are lost and refound all the time for a wild variety of reasons. So it makes little sense to base a culture's status on a certain technological achievement.
For the first time in more than 30 years, in its history, a Concorde has crashed.
The same unwheeled situation could be seen further south during the same time period with the sprawling Inca Empire, Tawantinsuyu, a massive imperial state that built 25,000 miles of roads throughout the Andes Mountains. Tawantinsuyu was one of the largest political entities on the planet in the 16th century, but it also did not have widespread use of the wheel. No wheel, no matter. Not better, not worse, just different. Despite the wheel having long been abandoned academically as a measure of anything, these examples show us that there is often more than one cultural solution to a challenge, that societies can and do reach a level of sophistication that proponents of unilineal theory might recognize as civilization, but without following Europe's unique paths of cultural evolution. The superficial similarities we see when comparing cultures do not necessarily imply that there is only one way for a culture to be in the world. But that's just the wheel. There are many examples from the contact period of the Americas that punch holes in the premise that Europeans were somehow a superior civilization in the unilineal sense. Let's start with some conquistadors. Hernán Cortés, his several hundred men and a handful of horses, did not conquer the Aztec Empire on their own. They had help in the form of thousands of Tlaxcalan warriors. Tlaxcala, an independent republic, had beef with the Aztecs. The empire had surrounded Tlaxcala and had been antagonizing them for decades prior to European contact. So when Cortés wandered in, the Tlaxcalans saw a chance to strike back at their neighbors using Cortés as their fall guy. Cortés didn't outright conquer anyone. He took advantage of an already existing conflict. Without Tlaxcala, Cortés wouldn't have gotten anywhere in Mexico. Let's mention just a few more examples to help reinforce this point. During the Spanish invasion of the previously mentioned Inca Empire, conquistadors switched out their metal breastplates and helmets and instead used Inca-style cotton armor with its elaborate layered design and high thread count. Not only was it as effective as European armor in that context, but it was a lot lighter to wear and warmer too. The same circumstance was reported of Hernán Cortés's troops in Mexico, with some of his men adopting the cotton-based Ixcahuipile armor of Mesoamerica. Lest you think that this sounds crazy, I'll just point out that the material used in modern bulletproof clothing, Kevlar and other related materials, is made of synthetic fibers woven in particular structured layers, and we certainly don't use metal breastplates anymore. Woven fabrics as armor seem to be a winning cross-cultural idea. It isn't just the armor of invading Europeans, it was their weaponry too. The clumsy matchlock guns of the contact era were not better than indigenous weaponry, or even basic bow and arrow archery, a fact not lost on generations of European colonizers. The matchlock was lousy in the rain and slow in chaotic battle conditions, as opposed to the bow and arrow, which was fast and relatively rainproof. It wasn't until the flintlock rifle became available in the late 17th century that European guns proved decisive on the front lines of empires. When John Smith, a player in the establishment of the English colony of Jamestown in the early 17th century, was captured by the Powhatan Confederacy, he broke his matchlock pistol rather than let his kidnappers discover how to use it, or discover perhaps that maybe it wasn't as effective as a bow and arrow. So, since the initial technological advantage of Europeans wasn't the advantage we imagined, then how is it that Europe came to dominate the Americas and much of the world? Disease is one answer to that question. After European contact, successive waves of European diseases raced ashore, ripping through indigenous trade routes well in advance of actual Europeans. Over the 2 centuries after the voyages of Christopher Columbus, European diseases killed some 85% to 90% of the humans in the Americas. Millions upon millions upon millions of people died, and neither the nations of Native America nor the invading Europeans truly understood why. But that's a whole other story. Context is everything when it comes to these matters. A unilineal argument of who is more advanced than who falls apart under some scrutiny. I mean, how do we define advancement? Is it the tools, the social thought, the music, the ability to steal from other cultures? Indeed, even a few minutes of basic scrutiny and reading pierces holes in the assumption of natural, universal stages of cultural evolution. It isn't difficult to see why antiquated unilineal theories were abandoned and why multilineal theories replaced them. The world is hugely diverse, and each society is a multifaceted thing. Unilineal theory doesn't explain that. So why is it that Star Trek continues to use the Prime Directive in its stories? A single, arbitrary, and universal litmus test of the advanced status of societies. Why continue to apply a universal metric to a galaxy of diverse alien cultures? It is a holdover from European colonialism, and perhaps a response to the geopolitics of the Vietnam War and the Cold War. But is Star Trek's response a helpful one if it reinforces an old, even a damaging philosophy? The existence of the Prime Directive, this litmus test of whether a culture is worthy of Federation diplomacy, suggests that the United Federation of Planets applies a universal, unilineal metric to all alien civilizations. That warp drive, like the wheel in our own real-world popular culture, separates the men aliens from the boy aliens, so to speak. The continued use of the Prime Directive in this imagined future speaks strongly to the assumption that the Federation thinks like Lewis Henry Morgan or Edward Burnett Tyler. Perhaps the Federation feels that it is the pinnacle of cultural evolution, that alien cultures must achieve the same steps as the cultures of the Federation did in order to be seen as legitimately advanced.
Perhaps one day my people will travel above the skies.
Of that I have absolutely no doubt.
If this is true, It is because the many, often culturally homogenous writers of Star Trek have contributed to this idea over the years. And that is just a reflection of a layperson's understanding of the human cultures and history in our own real world. Our own popular and false assumptions on the European colonization of the Americas and elsewhere has created the erroneous illusion of a more advanced society punching down to a bunch of less advanced ones. Colonization caused a lot of real-world harm, and that's the thing Star Trek is trying to solve with the idea of the Prime Directive. Its implementation within Star Trek comes from a place of empathy. But as we've been discussing, that perspective is built on a fundamental misunderstanding of how human cultures operate, and a misunderstanding of the real human history of our planet. That misunderstanding is now canonized inside the Star Trek franchise.
My world is called Earth, and though it's far from here, my people and yours are very much alike.
Even now, with the new series Star Trek Strange New Worlds, we see this same perpetuation of antiquated unilineal theory. In the pilot episode, titled Strange New Worlds, an out-and-out Prime Directive episode, we see a circumstance where Starfleet accidentally gives warp drive technology to a primitive alien society, and that society immediately threatens to destroy itself using that technology.
What we gave you is the means to exterminate yourselves. And from the looks of you, you're gonna do it.
Only the Advanced Federation, in the form of Captain Pike and the USS Enterprise, can save the day by humbly atoning for their mistake, reinforcing unilineal evolutionary theory in the process. Human societies do not evolve along a unilineal, universal, predetermined sequence of advancement. Instead, there are a variety of directions human cultures can evolve. Societies do grow more complex, it is true, and that may be more a factor of population size and interconnectedness if anything, but we have no idea where the various cultural evolutions are taking us, or which cultural recipe is correct. And that's because no cultural recipe is correct. All pathways can be valid, depending on how you measure them. And if that's true for humans, a single species of socially superpowered great ape that evolved on a single planet, then why do we imagine that aliens on a variety of fictional worlds would be subject to the same circumstance, the same outdated unilineal metric? Or let me put it this way. If a Federation starship showed up in orbit of the real-world Earth right now, in much the same way as the USS Enterprise might arrive at an alien planet, talking about interstellar governments and faster-than-light travel, would we not understand what is happening? I wager we would, if only because it's a fantasy we created, but mostly because humans are clever and we work hard. We may yet understand that scenario, and we've only been to our moon and back. No warp drive necessary. Maybe unilineal theory persists in Star Trek and elsewhere in popular culture because the first step we take in understanding a great unknown context is to put our face on that context, to endow it with human characteristics and the characteristics of our culture in particular. Maybe ethnocentrism is the first stage of imagining the possibility of other worlds, other peoples, and other realms. We imagine the alien or divine as ourselves first, to help us bridge the gap to knowing more. If so, then some of us undoubtedly get stuck in that initial phase. Western Europe found a plethora of human cultures as it sailed across the Earth in its own late age of exploration, an effort pushed across the centuries for colonial reasons, for capitalist reasons, and for reasons of curiosity and exploration too. It first looked for familiar cultural grounds in each new society it stumbled across, and it recoiled in horror at the differences it found. Europeans' own ethnocentrism largely informed their understanding of the peoples they encountered. Much less often did Europeans proceed using the cultural contexts of the various peoples with which they were interacting. Western Europe felt it could set the terms of these interactions based on their own cultural evolutions. All that led to real human tragedies on the grandest of scales, and it led to centuries of self-reflection, which is ongoing today. Maybe somewhere in that tragedy of colonization and exploration, we see the real measure of an advanced society. Perhaps an advanced culture is one that knows there is no one correct way for a society to organize itself and evolve, something the Star Trek franchise and other quarters happily preaches. maybe the more useful directive to be made a Prime Directive is that we consider societies who understand the multilineal nature of cultural evolution to be the ones ready for interstellar diplomatic contact. Maybe we do that instead of drawing an arbitrary technological line in the sand. So how does one fix Star Trek on this issue? In universe? I don't know. Definitely take warp drive or any other specific technology out of the equation, since it is a useless metric. And maybe stop with the "they can't handle the truth" act. One society can contact another and neither of them would suddenly explode as a result. They'll just adapt. This would allow the Prime Directive to be, rather, just a policy of allowing societies to make their own decisions, a policy of autonomy. And perhaps that is the central lesson to take away from our own real-world age of European colonialism. That talking to someone isn't a deal-breaker if you give them the respect of having their own agency and autonomy. If newly forged Spain had merely established diplomatic contact with the older Aztec Empire, instead of outright invading them, the world might be rather more spectacular today. Kinder, perhaps. Definitely more diverse. Or it might not. It's hard to say without a unilineal master plan to follow. Anything is possible. As for fixing Star Trek in our own real world from a film production standpoint, well, writers are a product of their cultures, and especially educations. I'd probably start by making an introduction into anthropology class mandatory in US public high schools. I am speaking from the cultural perspective of the United States of America, of course, the most multicultural imperial polity in human existence so far. It seems obvious in hindsight, but if one is going to have a multicultural society this big, then one ought to instruct its citizens on how cultures actually work. And maybe then some of that will filter down into the fictional stories we tell ourselves. Stories like Star Trek. Roll the end credit, please.
Greetings and welcome to the end of the video. We are coming to you from the beautiful prairie lands of the Oceti-Sakowing, the 7 council fires here on the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation. My name's Joe and I'm here to read the credits. This essay was written by Kyle Sullivan and Katie Boyer with input from Annalise Bayer, Ashleen Tierney, Brandon Phibbs, and Jay Manning. Editing narration was done by Kyle Sullivan. Special thanks to Annalise Bayer and Ashleen Tierney for lending their expertise to Trexpertise. And thank you to Leo, Thompson, and Garrett Wang over at DragonCon's Trek Track for allowing us to play in their sandbox. A super special thanks to our patrons who make all of this possible. Alex Blocker, Arum Fazal, Michael Goggin, Sam N., and all of the rest of y'all who love and support Trexpertise. Thank you. We'd be remiss if we didn't introduce you to Film Lore Co. Film Lore is a nerdy website about all science fiction, fantasy, and fandom with reviews, interviews, and articles covering everything from Lord of the Rings and Star Wars down to the silliest cult films about killer clowns. If you love this kind of stuff, and of course you do, so then go take a look. If you've enjoyed this, then consider supporting us on Patreon. Your support gives us space to explore more topics, create more essays, and dive deeper into the world of sci-fi. Just follow the link in the subspace below. Thanks. The Prime Directive is an antiquated piece of Western thinking. F*** colonialism.
That's perfect.
遠い将来を考えてみようよ。